The thing about counterpunching is a counterpunch is best used when you catch on to your opponent's timing and their patterns. So if your opponent's doing the same thing over and over again and you can pick up on their timing and their pattern and you can slip and get them, you can get a really clean shot in because typically it's a lot harder to hit someone when they're on guard. When someone's hands are up and they're on guard, they're watching you, it's a lot harder to hit them as opposed to when they're mid swing. When they're mid swing, typically they're all offense at that moment. And at that point, if you counter them, you're pretty much going to get a free shot. So that's why it's super important that when you throw punches, you make sure you have some kind of defensive mechanism going with your strikes to keep yourself safe. So if I'm throwing a punch, maybe my hands are really tight, right? Or if I'm throwing a punch, my head is offline. I'm going to add a defense right after. Don't just throw punches and leave yourself vulnerable. You want to make sure you have a defensive strategy going into it, especially if you're going to be throwing a combination. My man says, sorry, gang, but I have to unfollow you. Why is that? But yeah, so counter fighters typically are really tough to deal with though, just because counter fighters a lot of times they don't use a lot of offense. A lot of times they're like mostly all they just stand there and watch and wait. And sometimes they can put on a really boring fight. That's why it's really boring to watch two counter fighters fight each other because they're both just kind of sitting there waiting. You have two kinds of fighters. You have lead fighters and counter fighters. A lead fighter does his own thing. They throw jabs, they work. And then you have counter fighters. A counter fighter kind of just waits and lets you kind of develop the story while they look to counter you. And then you also have mixed breed, right? You have a spectrum of lead fighters and counter fighters. The spectrum would be like, hey, this guy 30% of the time he's leading, but he counters a little bit. 30% of the time he does some counters. You have like a 99% lead fighter, zero counter fighter who's like never counters people. He just defends himself. And then he works a lot on his own stuff. Then you have like a 99 on the counter side who pretty much never does his own work, but looks to counter you for the most part. Question. How do I clinch effectively against Muay Thai and MMA fighters? I don't think it really makes too much of a difference, right? The only difference is if you're going to be using clinch against an MMA fighter, you have to watch out for takedowns. Whereas if you're going to be clinching against a Muay Thai fighter, you're looking more for sweeps. So those are the big things that stand out between clinch work with MMA and clinch work with Muay Thai. Muay Thai, they're looking for sweeps. They're looking for, you're probably going to see more elbows being shot through, much more savvy and, slick and technical when you're clinching against a Muay Thai fighter because they work a lot of clinch work. Whereas an MMA fighter, they're mostly looking for to shoot under you. They're looking for like, it's kind of like wrestling clinching when you're striking MMA. So if you want to study somebody who uses good clinch work in MMA, look at Peter Yan. Great clinch game. Love your vids, bro. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. My man said, just joking to see your reaction. Why you stopped fighting, bro? I stopped fighting just because I didn't like the idea that like my whole livelihood was on the line whether I won or lost in a fight. I felt like it's a sport and it's kind of like a game in a way. Obviously, fighting is not a game, but in a way, it's kind of like a game because you win or lose. And based on if you win or lose depends on your livelihood. And I just felt like it was too steep of a thing. So that's why I decided to go into the online training route and do the social media thing, at least for the time being, so I can get money coming in on my own. And then after that, I would go back to fighting on my own terms, pretty much. And I said, what would happen if you punched me in the stomach unflexed? You would probably just get your wind knocked out, right? How do you think Mighty Mouse got so good while working construction 40 hours a week? Well, I think when you here's the thing. Here's an interesting philosophy to think about, right? A lot of people want things, but they're not willing to put in the work or the effort or pretty much like set everything aside to make sure that that thing happens. You can pretty much do most of the things that you want to do in life. Half the time that you don't reach your goals is just because you don't want it bad enough. Like think about the things you didn't get. The things that you didn't get, you just stopped wanting it. You changed your mind about wanting it. Because if you continue to want it, kept working at it, you would eventually figure out a way to get there. But what happens is you hit a couple roadblocks, you get some adversity in the way, something goes wrong, and you say, you know what? Maybe I don't want it. Maybe I want this thing over here, actually. So you don't wind up getting it. Not because you couldn't get it, but because you didn't want it no more. So a lot of the things that you desire in life, you can only attain that thing if you continue to desire it. If you really want to do something, you'll find a way. If not, you'll find an excuse. When you really want something, then you won't let anything get in the way. You're going to figure out a way to get it done. Like, think about there's crackheads that have no money, no place to sleep at night, but will still find a way to get what they want. So how is it that you, a completely healthy person, completely have all your faculties, a lot of things going for you, you can't get what you want? Are you saying a crackhead is better than you? That's basically what you're saying. So the thing is a lot of times it's not even the fact that you can't get what you want. It's that you don't want it bad enough, so you make excuses and then you quit on it. I feel like something that I've been really realizing lately is that a lot of times you won't go after what you want because there's so many reasons not to, right? So for example, you wanna go train hard today, but it's cold outside. That's a reason not to go. You want to go train hard today, but you got a stomach ache. That's another reason not to go. You want to go train hard today, but you got a new TV show that you wanted to watch. That's another reason not to go. There's always, and when I say always, there's always going to be reasons to not do what you know you should be doing. But guess what? Those reasons can't stop you from actually going and doing what you said you wanted to do. Yes, it's a reason, it's valid, whatever, but you can still go and do it. People look at those reasons and those excuses like, I guess I can't go. It's cold outside. You can actually still go. And the important part about it is this. If you don't go, the result that you said you wanted will not come. If I plant a seed in the dirt, I'm going to get an apple tree if I planted an apple seed, right? If I don't plant the seed, it doesn't matter what the reason was. It doesn't matter if it was cold outside, if it was raining, if I had a bellyache, I stubbed my toe. I didn't plant the seed, I don't get the apple tree. The reasons do not matter. So if you want the result, you have to let the reasons be the reasons, but they can't stop you. Yes, you're a reason. Yeah, I know. It's cold out. Whatever. I'm still going to go. Because your mind's going to always play tricks on you and try to stop you from doing what you know you want to do. Just, whatever. I'm still doing it. Is feinting a good way to beat a counterpuncher? For sure. Feinting is the best way to beat a counterpuncher. I would say there's a few ways to beat a counterpuncher, but feinting is one of the best ways, right? So I'll give you a few. So feinting is one of the best ways to beat a counterpuncher because if you feint, your opponent can't catch on to your timing and your patterns. And if they can't catch on to your timing and your patterns, they can't counter you. But there's other things you could do as well. So what you could do is when you throw a punch, as opposed to like backing out or staying where you are when you throw your punch, you can crash them. What it means to crash them is you throw your cross, boom, when it lands, you smother them. You close the distance. In order for a counter to be effective, they need to have a certain amount of space, right? If I want to do a slip counter, it only works if you're at a certain range. But if I go to slip counter and you're right here on me, you just nullify that counter. So crashing into a person after you throw your punch is another great way to counter. It's another great way to stop a counter. What else? I know there's more. Feinting, you can crash them. You can also look to counter the counter. So you could feint and they go to counter you and you counter them. So you beat their counter. There's more things. It's just slipping my mind right now. But there's multiple ways to beat counter fighters. But definitely crashing your opponent and feinting are like some of the best ones. What do you think is the keys to defeating Dagestani fighters? I think great cardio and you have to have good wrestling yourself. If you don't have good wrestling yourself, like if you're not savvy when it comes to wrestling, you're not going to be able to beat them. So you have to have a good understanding of wrestling yourself and good cardio, good dog. You got to be ready to fight. Like look at Jack Della Maddalena. I know Bilal is not like a Dagestani fighter, but he kind of had the right attitude. He had good get-ups, a good understanding of defensive wrestling, and then my man said, yo, bro, for your hit and defend video, do you always have to hit then defend in some way for a fight? You don't always have to defend after every single strike, but it is a good idea. It keeps you safe. You really just have to know who you're dealing with because not everybody fights the same, right? So if I'm going to be fighting against a counter fighter, then I have to hit and defend every single time because that person's always going to be looking to counter me. So my defense after I swing game, my defensive responsibility game has to be on 100. But what if I'm fighting against a fighter who's just a lead fighter, right? Once again, a lead fighter is somebody who he dictates his own fight. He doesn't wait to counter. He doesn't wait for his opponent to do anything. He just throws his own punches, right? You got like a Dustin Poirier, a Max Holloway. These are your lead fighters. They don't wait to strike. They just do their own thing. But then you have defensive fighters, somebody like Conor McGregor, somebody like Pitbull at 145 pounds, right? Patricio Pitbull. He just pretty much only counterfights. These people fight differently. So how you use your defense is going to vary based on who you're fighting. If I'm fighting a lead fighter who just throws a bunch of punches and doesn't really wait to counter me, I don't have to be as defensively responsible after my strikes because they're not going to be countering as much. They're mostly kind of waiting their turn to throw their punches. So for them, I need to just be on my defense outside of when I'm punching and then work my own punches in. If I'm fighting against a counter fighter, I'm not going to be as much on my defense outside of their punches because they're not punching much at all anyway. They're waiting for me. So when I do feint and I throw my punches, I better make sure I slip afterwards. I better make sure my head is offline because I know something's coming back since that person is a counter fighter. That's a good question. How do I know if I'm fighting a good boxer if I'm fighting the person for the first time? If you want to know if you're fighting against a good boxer or a good striker in general, all you have to do is judge them based on their defense. A good boxer, a good striker is going to have top tier defense. If their defense is just completely garbage, you already know as long as my defense is halfway decent, I'm going to be able to beat them. But if you can barely land any shots on them, then you know, like, okay, this is going to be a long night because I can't just throw a punch and land it. I have to figure out different ways to get my punch off. I got to figure out, is our body shots more effective on this person or are shots to the head more effective? What if none of them are effective? Maybe I got to go for the arms more. I got to figure out a way to bypass this person's defense. So you can judge a person's striking abilities based on their defense. Everyone can punch, right? Like your mom can punch, your cousin can punch, non-trained fighters can punch. Right now, if I go into the street and I pick any random person who doesn't know how to fight, say, let's just get into we're just going to stand here and we're just going to swing at each other. Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje style. They could possibly knock me out too. Everybody can punch. Everybody can throw strikes. But the difference is trained fighters have good range management to defend themselves. They have head movement. They have blocking ability. The better the fighter is his defense. The better the defense, the better the fighter. My man said Aljamain has very good cardio, but still lost to some average Dagestani fighter. Thoughts on this? I wouldn't say Evelev is average. The man is undefeated, and I think Evelev is just a little bit bigger than Aljamain. Aljamain is a big boy, but he was slightly smaller than Evelev. Evelev is shredded to get down to 145, and I think that made the difference. I think Aljamain was using a little bit more effort than Evelev was using in that fight, and that's why Evelev was able to get the better of Aljo by a little bit, right? Like he was just able to reverse it in the third round and kind of get the better of Aljo in that third round, but it was a very close fight. And I also think that like Aljamain was way too he's too grapple thirsty sometimes. I think if he would have struck more with Evelev, he probably would have had a good chance as well. He had the ability to do more striking and then mix in the grappling, but he just wanted to have a grappling session with him. My man said, who beats Ilia right now and of all time? I don't know, man. That's a good question. Who can beat Ilia? I think Max Holloway has a chance to beat Ilia if he fights him again. I don't think that the same thing would happen 10 times out of 10. I don't think if Ilia fought Max Holloway 10 times, it's going to be the same result. I think he caught him. He didn't just catch him. He worked for that knockout in that fight. But I think Max Holloway is a little bit better at 55 now. I think he can go in there and make it more interesting. If they were to fight and it was to boil down to points, I feel like Max Holloway could edge it. But the thing is that you got to be very, very, very cautious when you're fighting Ilia. So you might not be able to win on points because you're so cautious that you might not be landing as much as you want to land. But if you're too aggressive and Ilia catches you, it's night, game over. Ilia's knocking people out that never been knocked out before. So it's a really tricky test to fight Ilia. Can Islam beat Ilia? Possibly, right? Because Islam has a big size advantage. Ilia's a small 55er. Islam is a big 55er, especially if Ilia moves up to 170. Now he's just giving Islam all the advantage. So there is a possibility that Islam can win there because Bryce Mitchell was able to take Ilia down. So if Bryce Mitchell could take Ilia down, Bryce Mitchell just went down to 135. Islam just went up to 170. He's way bigger than Bryce Mitchell. So I feel like we'll know if Ilia can beat Islam based on if Ilia beats Arman. If Ilia goes in there and handles Arman handedly, then he's definitely going to go in there and beat Islam as well. Because they're kind of similar when it comes to fighting. Yeah, it's the same thing because or MMA, regardless of the kind of gloves that you use, what you're looking for is body mechanics. It's not the fists that really make the difference. It's the body mechanics, right? So when you're looking to defend yourself, you're not watching fists. You're looking at body mechanics, right? You're looking at how they push off their back foot. You're looking at how they're twisting their body. If I go like this, what do you think is going to come? A left hook. If I go like this, what do you think is going to come? A cross. If I'm standing normal, what do you think is going to come? A jab. Oh, you're not really defending fists. It doesn't really matter the glove size. It doesn't matter if you have no gloves on or boxing gloves on. That's kind of irrelevant. What matters is the body mechanics, how the person's using their mechanics. Would you say someone with no technique but good cardio? Who would win? Someone with no technique but good cardio, or someone with good technique but bad cardio? That's a good question. It depends. All right, so basically the question is this: who would win? A person with good technique and bad cardio, or a person with bad technique and good cardio? I think the answer to that boils down to how bad of technique does a person with good cardio have. If they have a 0 out of 10 and they're fighting somebody with a 10 out of 10 technique, I think the person with a 10 out of 10 technique can end it before cardio ever even becomes a question. But if that person has like a 3 and the other person has like a 6 or a 7, I think he can make up the difference because all he has to do is survive. If the person with a 3 on the technique scale can survive for just 2 or 3 minutes against the person with a 7 on the technique scale, then it's a wrap. Because when you gas out, it's like a whole different fight. The person that you thought you were before when you were fresh, it's very rare that people are able to maintain and still stay that same person and be a dog and bite down. Most people, when that tiredness comes in, that fatigue kicks in, they're a whole different person. Look at Conor McGregor. Him in the beginning of the fight versus him at the end of the fight is two completely different people. At the end of the fight, he looks drunk. He doesn't even know like what's going on if he even wants to be there. The beginning of the fight, he's an animal, right? You know what I'm saying? If a person with bad technique can get the person with good technique tired, he's gonna probably win that. That's a great question. Why does the black belt fighter in BJJ always lose to wrestlers 9 times out of 10? Does BJJ is not effective? Here's the problem with like jujitsu in MMA. Jiu-jitsu is a very laid back and relaxed type of sport. It kind of matches the vibe of Muay Thai, right? You see Muay Thai fighters are very slow moving, relaxed. Jiu-jitsu fighters are the same way sometimes, very relaxed. They kind of sit down in their butt and play this like defensive game. Whereas boxing and wrestling, they're much more athletic styles, right? Like if you watch how wrestlers train, they're training like animals. They're going hour, 2 hours, to doing all type of drills, slamming each other and working different cardio techniques, fast paced, like gritty, getting to it, tired, like done for after the session is over. When you watch a jujitsu session, if you go to train jujitsu, and I would know I train jujitsu, right? I love jujitsu. But if you look at a jujitsu session, they're just reviewing techniques. They do the move a few times and then they slap hands and they roll. It's a much more slow, relaxed pace as opposed to a wrestler style, much more gritty. So when you fight, those two different mindsets show most of the time. One is a dog on a bone getting after it, the other one's more relaxed, and they pretty much just get run over because of that. But another thing too is that jujitsu people are way too comfortable with being on their back, whereas wrestlers want to be on top. And in MMA, it looks better when you're on top. It looks like you're more of the aggressor. So it kind of plays into the score better as well. Is it better to learn wrestling than BJJ? You need to learn both. I think you want to be a good wrestler who has defensive grappling or some good offensive grappling. On a scale, you want to be like a 7 out of 10 with the wrestling, and you could be like a 4 out of 10 with the jiu-jitsu. That's still gonna get you further than being like a 7 out of 10 with grappling and like a 3 or 2 out of 10 in wrestling. Because if you're a jiu-jitsu person who can't wrestle, what does it matter? You can't get your opponent to the ground. Whereas if you're a wrestler who can't grapple, well, at least you can take your opponent down. And if he gets back up, take him down again. You're still gonna score. It's gonna set your striking up off of that. It's gonna look decent. A lot of times, boxers have hard times against wrestlers because wrestlers are always threatening the takedown. So all of a sudden, the wrestler's boxing looks a lot better. Not because it actually is better, but because the boxer's afraid of the takedown. You look at Merab versus Sean O'Malley. How is it that Merab is able to outstrike Sean O'Malley? Because the threat of the takedown is always there. Look at Islam versus Dustin Poirier. You think that would happen? You think Islam would be able to outbox Dustin if it was like a boxing match or a kickboxing match? Never. But because of that wrestling threat is so strong, the boxer who's, their skill is striking, they can't do what they want to do. They can't keep their mind on what they want to keep it on because they're always thinking about the wrestling and the takedown. Ilia has versatile techniques and uses strategies to win. So is he a combined lead and counter fighter? Yeah, I would say Ilya is kind of like a 50-50. He likes to lead, but he also likes to counter. He's not going to wait for you. He's going to do his own work. He's going to work off his jab. He's going to look for combinations, but he will counter you at the same time as well. So that's what makes Ilya so effective. Is his balance between being a lead fighter and a counter fighter is so cut down the middle, which means you have a lot to worry about. That means you have to be on defense outside of him striking, and you also have to be ready to defend yourself after you strike. You got to watch out for defense on every single front, which is why, Ilya has the champ, double champ in 2 weight classes. He has 2 belts. He doesn't have 2 belts, but you know what I mean. I respect you, bro. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Do you believe in God? Hell yeah. I believe in Jesus. What are some defensive techniques you can drill at home? I have an online training program. If you want to know more about that, just DM me.